Know your history. Amos chapter 4. It's no doubt that we can relate to this sentiment because history is extremely important to not just our society, but our cultures and even ourselves. To know where we came from helps us to understand where we're at and where we're going. It gives us insights into our mistakes and our failures, which then leads to the conversation of moving forward. When we truly know our history, we're able to understand what roadblocks to look out for in the journey toward the future. Last week in chapter 3, we read Amos's shouts at national leaders and the wealthy elite of Israel, talking about how they should know better. And Amos made the case that Israel should know better because they held a very specific gift, the spirit of prophecy. But for Amos, the spirit of prophecy is a spirit to bless the poor. In chapter 4, he continues to the next section of this conversation about knowing better, and he focuses on Israel's historical knowledge to further the case. Okay, before we get into the meat, I have to touch on Amos's intro words in this chapter, which is really kind of interesting because this is what it says. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, who are on Mount Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to their husbands, bring me something to drink. At first glance, we'll read this in our modern day language and say, ooh, that's kind of messed up, Amos. Why are you calling women cows? Immediately, husbands are going to be triggered from their trauma of the genes test. Does this genes make me look fat? To which the immediate response is supposed to be, not at all, baby. In reality, Amos's reference to the cows of Bashan come from his shepherding. Amos starts off as a shepherd himself. He is called by God to preach to the national leaders and the wealthy elite. And when he reaches Samaria, he notices their elitism is kind of real. They're like the real housewives of Samaria. And Amos is floored by this. It's like me watching the Kardashians with this face. But as I said, he's not being derogatory. Instead, he's actually pointing out their wealth as a matter of fact. So in better words, he's actually saying this. Listen here, you privileged people. He points out their wealth as a matter of natural phenomenon. And let me put it this way. Just like the natural prosperity of Bashan, they have a natural prosperity too. But for farmers and shepherds, if you live on a fertile land, it means something. For people of the land, fertility and wealth is a privilege. And from Israel's history, privilege comes with responsibility. So Amos calling them the cows of Bashan is to recognize their privilege and responsibility. This leads him to his next set of verses. Come to Bethel and transgress to Gilgal and multiply your transgression. Bring your sacrifices every morning, your tithes every 3 days. Bring a thank offering of leavened bread and proclaim free will offerings. Publish them, for so you love to do, O people of Israel. This is where Amos gets real. He's criticizing their priorities of their privilege. For the wealthy elite, it's more of a priority to be by the book of religion than to be for the poor. They were practicing their traditions well. And according to the rest of the Bible, these were things that God should be proud of. Morning sacrifice, tithes, thank offerings, free will offerings, all of which is reference to Bethel, a religious placeholder for good practicing Hebrews. But Amos has a problem with their practice. Not that they're ritually unsound, but that their spirit of prophecy has nothing to do with the ritual because it doesn't bless the poor. And remember, the poor can be translated as the marginalized. So what this means is that marginalized people are rejected and neglected despite religious practice. At some point, we go through this sort of self-centered version of tradition where religious practice is just what we do. It's not exciting. It's not life-giving. Instead, it's an obligation. This happens to all people, not just in church, but even at work. We get to this point where the routine becomes the burden, which takes away from the burden of serving the poor. Because complacency is the natural enemy of the spirit of prophecy. And the spirit of prophecy does two things simultaneously. For one, it gives us hope to a heavenly future. But because of that hope, it also tasks us with bringing that future to life. So Amos's spirit just wants us to read the signs. For the prophets, Israel's history is a sign in and of itself. God is and has been talking to them. And it's all through their historical knowledge, which they've been educated on. So he speaks rhetorically from verses 6 through 13. And rhetorical questions in Hebrew text is not necessarily done with attitude as we sometimes use it today. Instead, they're meant to remind people of the kind of knowledge they already know. Today we use the term common sense, which honestly is less common nowadays. I remember watching this comedian who said, I don't get how all of knowledge exists at our fingertips, and yet the internet makes us even more dumb. As funny as this is, it's also not. because truth can only come with a seeking of it. Amos's platform is based on education. And since the wealthy elite is educated, they should know better because knowledge is not just power. Knowledge is God. And God comes with a God-given responsibility. So what does Amos 4 challenge us with? It calls us to an education that doesn't just promote or validate our self-centered history, but rather one that uncomfortably moves us toward learning more about why the margins exist and how we can be a part of moving them out of it. Amos is uncomfortable for this very reason, an education that puts us outside of ourselves. So my questions this week are, where is our personal education currently coming from? Have we expanded our education beyond our borders? And does our education call us toward the margins? Because if not, then I would challenge us to press toward those margins.